Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Turndog Talks To. I'm delighted to be joined by AJ Leon, who is a bit of a nomad, but also the owner of Misfit Inc. So I've got to say I'm quite interested in hearing about AJ's lifestyle because it's very nomadic and I love the nomadic scene. Some of my favourite books are always that kind of nomadic lifestyle, so I'm rather envious of his little world and he's got some excellent things to tell us about. So AJ, first of all, thank you very much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me, Matthew. I truly appreciate it.
Not a problem, not a problem. You're at the minute in a town I've never heard of in America, that's right.
Fargo, North Dakota, in the
Man.
very north. It's freezing. It's like 3 degrees Fahrenheit outside. My car wouldn't start this morning. It's fantastic. I love it.
Nice. Well, I think we've got you beat at the minute in Yorkshire because we've been having like 6 feet snow drifts at the minute. So
That's crazy. I
yeah,
can't believe
I
that's
I
not.
think it's the end of the world, but hopefully it'll last long enough so we can get through this interview and I can edit it and then we'll,
Yeah, I blame it on Al Gore. I blame all this on Al Gore, you know.
man, you tried to help everything and you just made it
I
worse.
know, but the moment he
Always.
starts talking about it, all this stuff falls apart.
Well, I'm speaking to AJ this evening in aid of a successful mistake, a book that I'm working on, which is all about mistakes, but then how you overcome them. So before we get into the mistakes side of the interview, please, AJ, just give us an overview into who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. My name is AJ. I write at a site called pursuitofeverything.com for a group of misfits that are trying to change the world. And the topics that I typically write about are living with intention, doing work that truly matters, and giving more than you get. So trying to bake some type of humanitarian work or social work into what you do. I run a company called Misfit Incorporated. I've done that for almost 5 years. It's going to be our 5 year anniversary after leaving a successfully average career in finance and Wall Street. Um, and at Misfit, we do a great variety of different things. So I'll let you ask the questions, and I don't want to go into too many specifics, but yeah, that's my company.
You do a bit of everything. I noticed also that you've recently done a Kickstarter campaign for a book that you're working on, and I was loving the Kickstarter campaign, by the way. Um,
Thank you.
I'm I'm hopefully going to be running a couple myself over the next 6 months. So I'm always scouring the Kickstarter site and trying to see what people do and what works. And I saw your site and how it was laid out, and I was like, yes, I'm going to steal. I mean, borrow, and be inspired. However you want to work
Yeah.
it from
No, take
that.
it, take it. Yeah, it's funny because that Kickstarter campaign, I worked. A friend of mine, Clay Abear, he's one of the most genius Kickstarter marketers out there. Yeah, I think he has a product called Kickstarter Hacks, and he's
Yeah.
helped everybody from me to Seth Godin, lots of people. So if you do that, or anybody watching this is interested, contact Clay because he's just amazing. He's brilliant.
He's the man.
Yeah.
Nice. I'll have to do that. I'll have to do that. Well, I've got to say, yeah, I'm very interested in hearing your insights today, seeing what the nomadic lifestyle has. I'm sure it throws up a few issues and obstacles along the way, although they're
Oh
always
yeah.
there to be overcome. So I'm hoping you'll tell us a bit of a tale about one of the mistakes you've made sometime in the past, how it went down, what went wrong, but then how you turned it around and got to where you are today.
Sure. I mean, God, we were talking about before you hit record, there's a variety of different mistakes. I think mistakes are indicative of anyone creating art, right? I mean, there's gonna be so many times when you're gonna do something wrong and you iterate and you move on. I think at first, so here's probably a good piece of history for us. So Misfit's been around for 5 years. Over the last year and a half, I'd say we've started to launch a lot of our own projects. One of which you referenced, which is a Kickstarter, which is to publish our own book. And before that, 2 or 3 months later, we published a creative arts magazine called the Misfit Quarterly. So these publishing projects are part of something called Misfit Press. It's a project of ours.
Hmm.
In June, we're producing a conference in Fargo. It's our own conference. So it's our ideas, our people, and we're creating it for our tribe. Um, in August, this last August, I launched pursuitofeverything.com, which is a place for us to talk about our ideologies and what we believe the world could be and kind of some of our ideas. But that's a very recent move. So when we set up our company originally, probably a big mistake that we made was focusing on client-centric work,
Okay.
because it's the lowest hanging fruit. You can always figure out a way to get clients. whatever it is that you're doing. So our strong suit is design and development and marketing. And right from the get-go, that was our kind of focus. And we created a client services business, which is still in existence today. We still do some client service work. It's probably about, it's flipped upside down. Whereas before it was like 80-20, 90-10 client work to our own projects. Now it's flipped on the other side. So it's probably 20% client work, 80% our own projects. And we did that very deliberately, but it's hard to claw away from something that you rely on. Client work brings in cash, very quick cash. Doing your own projects is much more risky, and the consistency of cash that you bring in is, if you're on our end, like if you're doing, create any type of service work, right? Whether you're doing some form of consulting on the web, or if you're a designer, if you're a developer, whatever you do. And I think that is probably, from the get-go, we should have focused more on our own projects, and then worked how we can generate kind of finances and everything around that, and have a good balance. Because if not, you create an overhead in which you need the constant flow of client work in order to support that overhead. But if you initially, if your impetus is not a client services firm, then you're never going to create that overhead to begin with, because you'll never need it to support the monster. So we kind of, in the last 6-7 months, particularly, if anybody looked at our work, you'd see like we're just launching our own projects left and right. And we're going to continue to do so all the way through June. We have plenty of launches coming up, and they're all Misfit projects, something that, we probably could have done 3 years ago, but we just didn't.
Yeah, and I would imagine it's something that most people want to do, because when you work for yourself, you don't generally do it so you can work, do all this client-based stuff. You do it so you can create your own world.
Right.
You want to be the person, not, getting paid to go to the conferences. You want to be the guy behind the conference. You want to be doing the service product. You don't want to be creating one for someone else.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
like you say, it's just the easy money in the beginning, because you've got someone who say, yeah, I need someone to do this, and I will pay you X amount of money. And you go, fantastic. I've got, X amount, happy days. Whereas if you do it yourself, you've got to pay for it. It takes longer, and then there's no guarantee that it's going to be a success. So it's this balancing act between, I suppose, living towards your dream straight away,
Yeah.
and doing enough to kind of, I suppose, feed that dream.
Yeah,
in the
precisely.
meanwhile.
And you have to be deliberate about it. I mean, we had always planned to make this shift. We could have made it earlier. We could have made it earlier. And to some extent, client-centric work, particularly in design and development, it allows you to cut your teeth a little bit, so you can get paid to figure shit out that then you bring to your own project. So there are ancillary benefits of it, but it didn't have to. We could have made this transition earlier, as I'm looking back. And certainly from an ideological perspective, like, all these projects are because are out there because we launched pursuitoferything.com, which is a platform where we talk about our ideas. And now, just in the last 6 months, it's become pretty popular. And there's, we have thousands of followers. And you just think about, like, why didn't I do this earlier? What was it that prevented me? And a bit of that is probably fear, that when you do client work, you're not exposed. You're just working with a client and doing work. And if you're exposed to one person or a company when you present your idea and say, hey, let's do this. When you are launching your own project, like for instance, your book, you are completely and utterly exposed, because what you're saying is that your book is worth 10 pounds of my money and at least, 5 hours of my time, if not more. And that is that's a pretty confident posture. And I think a lot of people, me included, probably, you have that as an artist, you have that fear, whether it's going to be rejected or not. And then that'll almost cause you in a way to go to stay close to shore, where you don't kind of you're pressing into the horizon a little bit, but you don't lose sight of the shore of what you know. And I think in my life at least, since leaving abruptly my previous life in finance, because I left very abruptly, it's been kind of this iterative journey of sailing further and further and further away from shore until I couldn't see it anymore. And now you're just in open waters, and your life is your own, and you make, very intentional decisions every day. So
And it is hard. I think anyone who's got a bit of artistic flair or creative flair about them, fear is always going to play a part. We're
oh
not
yeah.
always necessarily, we don't suffer with self doubt per se, but we're certainly not necessarily the most confident person in the world. And we're
Oh
always looking
God.
back and thinking, am I a fraud? Am I a hack? Am I actually doing anything worthwhile? You have your
I,
good days and your bad days.
yeah.
Everyone who's kind of a writer or artist who I speak to, they they pretty much follow that line. I feel if you don't have that as an artist, you're probably not an artist
Very
because
precisely.
how
Yeah.
dare you be so confident? It's just not, it's against the rules. But I think a
Yeah.
big part of it, you said in the beginning, is that you get used to the money as well. So you
Oh,
might
yeah.
have your plan of, I'm going to do this for the first year, but then I'm going to by year two bring out these and then out this. But before you know it, you've gone 3 or 4 years in and you're still doing the client base. And I think that's quite indicative of the corporate world in general, where you leave university and you get the job for the big conglomerate and you say, I'm just going to do it for a couple of years, pay off my
Yeah.
student loans, get a bit of good stuff for the CV, and then I'm going to leave and I'm going to do something worthwhile. But it's one thing saying that. It's another thing then leaving that 35, 40,000 pound or dollar a year wage to go to
Yeah.
something that may only pay you half that, but you're doing something real. And I
Yeah. And
suppose as a self-employed person, working for clients is kind of like that corporate bubble. You get used to working for other people, you get used to the money,
precisely.
and the fear just grows and grows.
Yeah, and then at one point you're making decisions that are not your own. I was in Austin at South by Southwest a couple weeks ago, and I was walking with this guy we just met, and he asked me what I did, and I told him, and he asked me a little bit about my story and why I left, and I told him, well, the day I left, it was December 31st, 2007, and I left my finance job because it was 4 days before my wedding, and I was offered this major promotion that would have put me second in my company. And it was the most terrifying moment of my life because I realized that I would be making a sum of money and I would have gone up the ladder so far that I would never be able to walk away.
Mm.
And I was stuck in this convergence point between the life I lived and the life that I felt like I'd always been destined to lead. And it was terrifying. And that moment caused, this, like, for the first time in my entire life, I had actually considered, maybe I've been living some other dude's life. Um, and I realized that if I didn't leave right then and there at that moment, that I was going to be mourning the glory of a life that could have been 40 years hence. I would have gone down that track. And I think that obviously you have that corporate world moment, but what I've learned since then is you always have those moments. You
Mm.
always have to keep, um, it's a constant battle between doing something that matters, and staying safe and secure. Our proclivity is towards safety and security in whatever form it comes, whether it's a job or whether it's client work or whatever. And but our job as artists and creators, as I mean, it's to stiff arm that and to keep on sailing away, from shore, and to not allow that paradigm of safety and security and compliance to govern our daily actions and certainly not our work because this is our one and only life. We get one. We know that for sure. We get one.
That's
And
very true.
what are we going to do with it? So, yeah, I agree
So,
with you.
so in a way, you've kind of gone through this twice. You've gone through it as working for someone else. You got to that, I suppose, that tipping point where you thought, if I take this promotion, that's it. I'm going to be at this job or at least in this industry working for someone else forever. I'll never be able to walk away. So you leave, you set up your own company, you do client-based work, and then you get to another stage after a few years and you think, right, if I don't stop doing client work now, or at least peg it back a bit and start doing our own thing, we're just going to get caught in this bubble again and constantly working. So each time you've kind of hit this point,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit longer than you wanted to, but you were conscious at some level to make that change.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, yeah, I mean, I'll hit it again. I think it's something that, I feel like there's some battles in life that are cyclical, like that
Yeah.
fear. I mean, the worst day of my life was the day that I launched that Kickstarter because it was the worst, I should say, half an hour of my life. I hit the launch button and immediately I regretted that decision. I was like, nobody's going to get this. I'm going to look like an asshole in this video. And I'm going to be sitting here in 30 days with two backers, one being my mom and $300 of a $10,000 goal. And you can ask Melissa, I was terrified. Um, and then lo and behold, 5 hours later, it's funded and it got triple and quadruple funded. And, but that fear is almost prohibitive. It's almost keeps us from doing things like turning away from client work earlier than you probably should, so yeah, I mean there's lots of those moments, tons of them.
So what have you learned from it then? Because it's happened a couple of times, and with it being cyclical, you're obviously expecting it to happen again at some point in the future. Has it made you kind of look at it a bit differently and think, right, what sort of things should I look out for? How should I approach my world on a day to day, and maybe it's in a grander way? Has it made
Yeah,
you
I,
reflect?
I mean, I think the most important verity that I've walked away from, like at least my life experience, has been to live deliberately, to dig in my heels and clench my fists, and I decide what I want, and it seems basic and it seems like, oh, don't we all do that? But we don't do that. We don't do that. And even, most of us, we allow well-intentioned advisors, whether that's friends or family or colleagues or whoever, in some way act as demagogues over our paradigm, over the way we live our lives and the decisions that we make, because we feel like, we should have a house. No, I mean, we should own a house by the age of 30, and we should have, whatever it could be in your life, that, a house and a white picket fence and 2.5 kids, or that a newer car, or a steady life, a steady and stable life. Certainly, if I went back 5 years and told myself, my former self, that I would have bought an old municipal bus, gutted it, turned it into an RV, and be traveling around the country running on vegetable oil while running my company, I'd think I was a fucking ass. I mean, I would think that I was insane, like, um, and but now that is my life, and but I think the key is that it's a life of my choosing.
Yeah.
I have chosen it, and I think that is kind of, and that's less business, but it permeates everything. Business can't be business, or what you do as a person to make a living. I mean, is so indicative and endemic to who you are. The first question we ask ourselves is, "What's your name?" The second is, "What do you do?" It is an identifier.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think just living deliberately every day is probably that's what I've walked away with.
And it's so obvious when you paint it like that, because when you become self-employed or you set up your own business, whatever it is, the sole reason is to work for yourself and not for someone else.
Right.
You're taking a deliberate decision of saying, I don't want to work for the man. I want to work for me in whatever, sphere that might be. You want to take control of your own world. But like you
Sure.
say, just because you do it, it doesn't always mean you actually do it, because you can still get caught in the cycles of you start trying to do too much for your clients and what you think you need to do, and
Sure.
5 years later it doesn't feel like you're working for yourself. You're just working for this company that happens to have your name attached to it, but it doesn't feel like yours, and it just
Exactly.
defeats the whole
I
purpose.
mean, you're basically in the same prison, except
Yeah.
now it's locked from the inside and you're holding the key, you know? And that's even more terrifying in a way,
Yeah.
because there's nobody to combat anymore. There's no position to fight against anymore. It's you.
Mhm.
You're the one who put yourself there. So I think that's why it's so incredibly important.
So what would you advise for someone who's kind of starting out? Because I think everyone, or most people, they start out with that grander vision. This is where I want to be in 3 or 4 years' time. But I know to get there, I'm going to have to, sell my soul a little bit, do a bit of this, which I don't want to do, but I'm willing to do because it's going to help bring in the money and it'll help fund this.
Right.
But what would you advise to kind of keep people on that track and I suppose still live deliberately
Yeah.
on a day-to-day life?
I mean, if you're starting out, I would say a couple things. First of all, my friend, I mean, I left abruptly my old life. I never suggest that or posit that as a life plan. I think that that is ludicrous. I don't think that you should just go crazy one day and then just leave your job and figure out how to pay rent. That's what I did, and it ended up working out. But I was certainly hunting cats in Tompkins Square Park for a couple months trying to figure out how I was going to pay rent. Um, so I would say while you're in your job, start coming up with possible idea, try things, tinker. It doesn't have to be revenue generating project. Most things on the web that are interesting that people follow don't make money. Most of them are humanitarian, social projects, creative projects, but they bring people's attention because they're generous in nature, and they can be helpful in building and creating revenue generating projects. I'm a big believer that at Misfit, the humanitarian projects that we do, where we make $0, exactly nothing, and actually we spend money doing humanitarian projects, has brought a level of attention to our work that it was inadvertent. I didn't think that that would happen, but you can see it. People pay attention. Last June, we were in Malawi, working with an NGO and helped raise a bunch of money for water and sanitation programs there with WaterAid in Malawi, and that brought a lot of attention to our company. And it brings attention to even the creative and the for-profit side of it. So I'd say if you're in your job right now, start thinking about the things that you actually love to do. Don't think about how I can generate revenue, but what do you love to do? And see if you can start creating a web-based project around that and tinker and see how it goes. Because then you have time while you're still making a paycheck. The second thing I would say, which I didn't do until after I left, and I never really done in my life, until I was out of my former life, is draw, like, actually write down what you want your life to be, and what in 2 years. I think 5 years is like 5 years ago there was no iPhones and there was no Facebook, so that's a little bit too far out, or Facebook wasn't prolific, so that's a little bit too far out. I think tomorrow is a little too soon, but using a 2-year barometer and saying 2 years from now, what do you want to be? How do you want your life to look like? If 2 years from now you want to be a nomad, right, and you like just and travel around as and when you want, then I probably wouldn't suggest opening up a cafe. It's probably not a good idea. There are some things that are mutually exclusive. So if you define the qualities that you want your life to inhabit on that kind of archetype, and saying in 2 years like Melissa and I wrote, we wanted to work together, and we wanted to work on humanitarian projects, and we wanted to run a business with no headquarters, and we wanted to travel at least 50% of the time. Now we do much more than that, and all those things, and we use that as a roadmap. So I'd certainly say that, and then also, and third, and this is kind of an aside, but look at your overhead. There's a lot of things that when you're starting out, you need to ramp down expenses from a pragmatic perspective. There's a lot of things that back in the day when I was in finance, I thought were needs. Now I understand them as they were wants, or things that are just, a lot of times you buy shit that you neither need nor want, and you just do it because you do it. The newest TV, a newer car, blah, blah, blah. So if you're thinking about striking out on your own, you need to reduce your financial exposure personally, and from a business perspective, as much as humanly possible. So start to question everything you spend money on, even from a business perspective, to pare it all down, so that when you launch, you have the lowest possible overhead that is necessary to do what you need to do.
And that sets you in good stead going forward, because it's always easy to spend money, but it's not always easy to spend wise money. And
precisely,
if you can get in them good frame of mind early on, it certainly helps further down the line when you've actually got money to spend, because you'll end up wasting it on everything.
I agree. Yeah.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, AJ. The insight's been superb, and it's been so interesting to sort of see you come from that kind of corporate background. It's very much chalk and cheese from the financial sort of corporate world to the more sort of design, artistic, humanitarian nomad. But it doesn't really matter. On both sides of the fence, you came across those same issues. Absolutely. And you got to a point where you realised, and then you're able to move on. And I feel like when you come across that in the future, you'll spot it sooner, you'll be able to react quicker. And although self-confidence will never be 100% there, because I think that happens to few, but it'll probably become more in your world, which will be very good.
Yeah, I agree with you. Everything is exponential in life, and you're extrapolated. You learn, and you can carry that learning forward. That's why failures are so good to carry with you. The more you stock up, the better you are.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you very much for joining me, and viewer, thank you for joining too. It's been an absolute pleasure, so cheers.
Thanks for having me on.